I'm very pleased for several reasons. The first is that you all are here this evening in this amazing turnout. And it's at a time when farm and wilderness is absolutely flourishing. And we have all reached out and seen how everyone has stepped forward and said, farm and wilderness is important to me, and I want this to be here for many generations of campers ahead. And it's huge what we've been able to do to bring the organization forward. And it's also huge to recognize our past and to recognize all of our alums and all of the people that carried bucket after bucket of gravel, that shoveled bucket after bucket of mud under the lodge to put a footer in, that chopped cord after cord of wood, and that farmed for thousands and thousands of cucumbers. It's really fun. So we're only here because of you all. And our generation of children, I have 3 children in the camps right now, is only able to have this experience because of all the hard work that you all have put into F&W. And even more importantly, all the intention that you put into making Farm and Wilderness a phenomenal place. A place that's inclusive, a place that's rugged, a place that's about hard work, standing in a rainstorm and loving it, being covered with mud and thinking that's the best thing ever, and coming back year after year. So let's first have a round of applause and look around at each other and say, wow, this is phenomenal. So I'm very pleased to this evening announce something. And this is a pre-announcement of something that's going to get announced later. And this is that Farm and Wilderness created the Circle of Light. I should read it to you. I'll read it to you. The Circle of Light is an award given by the Board of Trustees to recognize distinguished service and a long-term commitment to supporting and advancing the mission of Farm and Wilderness. As of today, there are 13 members of the Circle of Light, and we have 3 new members that will join the Circle of Light, all of whom are here this evening. They will join the Circle of Light at the Indian Brook and the Saltash Mountain reunion. But I wanted to first have Jack and Ruth Hunter step forward for a moment. So Jack and Ruth will be fitfully honored with official plaque thereof at the Saltash Mountain reunion. But I just wanted to take a moment to, and I'm looking at this, and this is probably an 1/8 of what you've done for F&W, but bear with me. Jack Hunter, founding co-director of Saltash Mountain Camp in 1962, first executive director of Farm and Wilderness Foundation, first Farm and Wilderness archivist, dedicated parent and grandparent of campers and staff, Legacy Circle member. And there's no mention of carrying buckets of compost in there. Ruth Hunter, founding co-director at Saltash Mountain Camp in 1962, dedicated parent and grandparent of campers and staff, anecdotally flying squirrel, staff person extraordinaire, and Legacy Circle member. So these guys will both be fitfully recognized at the Saltash Mountain reunion. But in the meantime, I didn't think that we could convene this group of people and not first break the news. So thank you. Thank you. Okay. If that wasn't exciting enough, there's a particular person who's been around Farming Wilderness for quite a while, standing in the front row. Polly Williams, will you step forward? So again, this is probably an eighth, maybe a 16th of what actually happened. Polly Williams, Indian Brook camper beginning in 1981, Indian Brook staff, director of Indian Brook, Barn Day Camp staff, anti-racism team member, dedicated parent of Farm Wilderness campers, and now assistant director of the Barn Day Camp. So, and again, Polly will be recognized at the Indian Brook reunion with the official certificate thereof. So, how are you guys all doing? It's warm. Okay. I am very excited to reintroduce Polly Williams. Come on back up. To reintroduce Polly Williams, who will be introducing our guest speaker for the evening. Polly.
Joan Countryman was born and raised in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the daughter of William P. Kennedy and the wife of Virginia Banks Kennedy. Bill Kennedy, a public school teacher and administrator, and his wife were deeply committed to the education of their daughters, Joan and Carol. Indeed, they were so committed that when Joan came home one day in the winter of 1948 and reported that she and her best friend had been assigned to dust the supply closet at Emlyn School because they had read ahead in their second grade reader, the Kennedys made an appointment with the principal and demanded an explanation. One of the stories that Joan shared with us was when the principal at Emlyn insisted she saw nothing wrong with the teacher's decision to have Joan dust the closet. Mr. Kennedy balked. He was not happy. The next thing she knew, she was out of that school in a matter of days and transferred to another Philadelphia public school. And by next September, she was enrolled in third grade with a scholarship to Germantown Friends. It was once illegal to teach a slave or a free person of color in this country to read or write, Joan says. When I asked my son, who is a historian, whether it made sense to see a connection between that history and my parents' swift reaction, he said, "Mom, whatever the teacher intended, your parents made the connection." It's really funny because right as I said that, my iPad said no connection. Joan Countryman was an Indian Brook and Tamarack Farm camper from 1952 to 55, then staff at IB and F&W 57, 58, 59, and 61. She was the first African-American graduate of Germantown Friends School and earned her bachelor's degree from Sarah Lawrence College, a master's degree from Yale, and was a Fulbright scholar at the London School of Economics. She went on to be a math teacher and an assistant head at Germantown Friends School. She was the interim head of the Atlanta Girls School, head of the Lincoln School in Providence, Rhode Island, and then the interim head of the Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy for Girls in South Africa. She is currently the chair of the board for Rhode Island Public Radio. She is a former F&W board member and is a current member of the F&W Visitor Circle. I give you Joan Countryman.
You know, I was going to say, and at least it wasn't pouring rain as we came over, but I imagined that it might be. And I was going to say, who among us would not admit that whatever dreams we have of camp when we're far away, those dreams, I'm sure they are for me, filled with blue sky and warm breezes. In fact, our real memories are of torrential rain. So there. The last Saturday in June 1952, 60 years ago. I think it was the 28th. I arrived at Indian Brook with 3 6th grade classmates from Germantown Friends School. We climbed out of the car onto the lawn in front of the main lodge, which had a newly completed L, which had been built to an L, which that was a word I didn't know until I stood there in the dark, fighting the no-see-ums, which were biting us, which had been built to relieve crowding among the cabin tables in the dining room. That L is now freestanding. I saw it yesterday. I didn't go inside, I meant to, but the dining room now has moved over to another beautiful building at Indian Brook, but the L is still there. That's 60 years ago. Now, this was an all-day drive from steamy Philadelphia along the newly opened, I found that out from Wikipedia, the newly opened New Jersey Turnpike, the New York Parkways, and then eventually on US Route 7 in Vermont. It was chilly by the time we reached the Pownell Valley and cold enough for wool jackets when we got to Route 100, which was a dirt road from West Bridgewater, and got to camp. There was a staff square dance going on in the L, that being the Saturday before the campers were to arrive. It was in full swing, as it were, but we girls had only enough energy to say hello, make our beds in a nearby cabin, and climb into them. We made the beds with heavy wool blankets. All of which is to say, it used to be colder in Vermont. So my memories of the first days, we arrived early. Most of the campers came on Monday, I think, but they're a blur of trunks being delivered, rough wool blankets, Army surplus sleeping bags, mess kits, the smell of balsam, tours of the horse barn, the waterfront, the names of the cabins, Shining Waters, Little Crickets, Aquaview, Beavers, Birches. We GFSs were in Tadgers and Pooh Corner. The counselors, Gladdy, who's here tonight, Lou, Swetland, soon to be Carmen, Molly, Alice, Ann, Hazel, Susan Webb, the director. During my 3 years as an IB camper, the activities that struck a chord with me had to do with crafts and archery, horseback riding. We did that. You paid extra. Swimming, current events on Monday night, and square dances on Friday with those mysterious boys from Timberlake. Overnight hikes on the Long Trail. Now, on Sunday afternoons, as I remember, we sometimes had cabin hikes, and a favorite was over the notch to Plymouth, not least because of the penny candy we were allowed to purchase at the general store. I remember vaguely a tour of the Coolidge homestead, probably overseen by the housekeeper, who apparently was still there and for many years thereafter, who had been the Coolidge family housekeeper. And more vividly, I remember the interior of this church with its simple pews and altar and the wooden walls, which this is the first time I've been back since probably 1953 or 4, but it looks to me the same. So it shouldn't surprise you that when I received a call this spring from Christy Webb saying that the board had been talking about this event and wanted to talk with me a bit about it because some questions had arisen about Calvin Coolidge and the Ku Klux Klan, and they wanted to be sure I would be comfortable having the event here. Christy and I had a good talk, and I said that I had 2 reactions. One was that I had been in South Africa where I learned something very important to think about my own country, and that was the way in which we handle our history. And I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. The other thing I said was that my son is an historian, so I always ask him questions about things like that. So I said, let me call Matthew and see what he has to say. So here's what Matthew said. One, he said, Mom, you know, we have to, we always think about these things in context. That sounds like an historian. He's right about that. So think about what the 1920s were like in this country. That was post-World War I. It was the early 20th century. Emancipation of slaves had happened in the 1860s. By the 1920s, we had had a fairly long period of what is now called the Great Migration of African Americans from the South to the North, looking for not only escape from oppression, but also looking for work and access to the privileges, as it were, of citizenship. The 1920s, when we look back on it, we hear stories about lynching. We hear about Coolidge as Silent Cow, and we hear that, in fact, in 1925, the Ku Klux Klan was claiming 3 million members. The Ku Klux Klan that we're talking about, of course, is the one that was not only opposed to blacks, it was opposed to Catholics in general and Jews and just about anybody else you can think of who was not, in their minds, pure white, perhaps Anglo-Saxon, etc. So Matthew then said, okay, in that context, it is not a surprise that Calvin Coolidge may have tolerated this, in particular, the Klan in the 1920s. What is a surprise, and that we should all honor in our memories, is that Ken and Susan Webb, in less than 20 years from that, set out to establish these racially integrated camps in a country that has that history. The research on Coolidge, in fact, does show that Silent Cow spoke up for tolerance over bigotry. In fact, there's a letter from a man named Emmett Scott, an African-American Republican politician in Washington, a letter thanking Coolidge for statements connected, and this is a quote, with our citizenship and distinguished service in behalf of the race of colored people. And it was written by Emmett Scott, who was then the secretary-treasurer of Howard University. Now, Howard, you may know, was a university that was founded in 1867, I think, and it was named after General Oliver Howard, who was a U.S. Army officer and a Union general, and the first president of Howard University from 1867 to 1873. What you may not know is that Emmett Scott's granddaughter, Marjorie Scott, was an Ivy camper in the 1950s. And I'm sure, I know, some of you know, that General Howard's granddaughter is Susan Howard Webb, whose commitment to simplicity, equality, tolerance, peace, diversity, and social justice we all honor. For the last more than 70 years, children, an extraordinary number of children, have experienced all of these in these farm and wilderness communities. I did, my children did. And just by thinking about the lessons of farm and wilderness, the lessons of the farm and the wilderness and the waterfront, the gardens, the work, the service, and the reflection about these communities, and the ways in which, for the three of us, for me, for Matthew, and for Rachel, think of the communities that we have helped build, suggest that the impact of the webs is far greater than we might even know. I often think that that is true in general, by the way, of Quakers. Quakers in our American history, their service belies the numbers. So let me say a little bit about this family that Polly described. Education is the family business. My father led us into teaching. My sister, my son, my daughter, and I were all farm and wilderness campers. We are all teachers. We all lead lives devoted to the values promoted by these camps, to simplicity, to honesty, to self-reliance, to respect for all persons, to diversity, and to community. I've been thinking about stories that I might tell on my children, on their experience in farm and wilderness. Polly told me it'd be okay, I could tell them anything because they're not here, right? But I have to be respectful of that, and I'm sure some of them they don't want you to know, but I will tell you that Rachel's stories would have to do with building composting kaibos. She was among the first group of campers who did that. And Matthew's, I think, at least the story I like to tell, is about slaughtering chickens for Food Day. He said, "Mom, it's one thing to learn how to slaughter chickens. It's quite another thing to teach 9-year-olds." So the lessons I learned as a child here and at GFS and at Sarah Lawrence all were deeply engaged with John Dewey's belief that education should consist of reflection about experience. As an adult, I was active in the civil rights movement of the 60s, in trying to bring about change in Philadelphia public education, as a teacher and administrator at Germantown Friends School, as the leader, the head of Lincoln School, which remains the only all-girls Quaker school in North America. By the way, Susan Webb served on the board of Lincoln School at one time. As the interim head of the Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy and as the interim head of the Atlanta Girls School, as I look back on my service and all of those things, I see how, at least clearly to me, they were shaped by the kinds of experiences that I had here that said, you can make a difference and you can particularly make a better contribution if you're thinking carefully about what it is you're doing with others. So in 2002, I was head of Lincoln School, and I actually, honestly, the truth is that I had been there for 9 years, I think, and I noticed that other heads with tenure that long were beginning to talk about having sabbaticals. Now, I was actually thinking about retiring, and I did retire in 2005, at 65, mind you. By the way, everybody looks at me and says, what do you mean when I talk about things that I do? And I know I look younger than that, but I am 72, it's true, and it was time for me then to retire. So, but in any case, in 2002, I said to the board at Lincoln, who were asking me about was I interested in having a sabbatical? I said, actually not, but there is NAIS is planning a trip to South Africa, planned by a member of the F&W Trust Board right now. I have to tell you, Jean Baptiste is here this evening. And I would really like to go. And they said, what a good idea. And so with their support, I joined that group. Now, I should say that I am a child of a time. I was in 7th grade when I read Cry the Beloved Country. And I looked at South Africa from then on as somehow a mirror. It was as though looking at South Africa was looking at the United States through one of those mirrors in a fun house. You know, everything's kind of distorted. It was all twisted around, but it looked like it was familiar. It was the same place, only different. One, that's the second thought about South Africa, is that I never imagined I would ever set foot there. I knew what their history was, and there wasn't any way I would ever go there. In fact, in my lifetime, I didn't believe that it would change. So when Nelson Mandela was released in 1990, I was, as everybody else was, completely stunned and excited about the possibility of change that represented. So, 4 years later, I got a call from Oprah Winfrey. Actually, I got a call from a friend who was a school head who knew that I had retired, and she said, Oprah is starting a school. She would like to have some advice about the administrative structure. Would you be interested in going for a few weeks to work with them? And I said, yeah, I think so. But I should talk with my family, and you know what they said. Ma, are you crazy? Of course you're going. So off I went for, I thought, 2 weeks. Actually, I was there for a week helping select students in the first class, and then Oprah, I was there for a week, and then Miss Winfrey came, and she got involved in the interviews. And in the end of that period, she asked me to stay on for another weekend, so we did some more interviews, and then she and I sat down to talk, and according to Oprah Winfrey, and of course we should believe her, she says that at some point I said, well, what sort of person are you looking for to be the head? And she said, I want you. And I was flattered, and I said, but I'm really too old to be. I said, I'm too old, I'm 66, and she said, 66, you go, girl. So I said, listen, I will help, and that's how I then became the founding head of the Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy. My husband and I were just there in January. We saw the first class graduate. There are 72 girls who graduated and finished their work in December. These are girls who came from families, there was an income ceiling. It was $10,000, the equivalent of $10,000. I doubt that anybody's family had anything near that income. But they came from under-resourced schools. They were clearly kids who had no other opportunity to go on to university. So we are very, very proud of what's happened with them. I would like to tell you about 2 of the interviews that I had. The way we selected them was we looked at their school records. They had recommendations from principals and teachers, and they were interviewed by a team of teachers or psychologists or various people, and I participated in those interviews. And then the final interview was with Miss Oprah herself, and as you can imagine, that was a big deal. And of course, they all imagined when they were selected at first that meant they were going to meet Oprah Winfrey, which, by the way, people always ask me about this. Yes, it's particularly in the English-speaking world, everybody knows Oprah. Everybody. Even people like me who don't watch television know Oprah. So, but in any case, the final interview was with her. But in any case, I was participating in this, and I got to interview 20 or 30 girls each time we had as one of these sessions. So one little girl, an 11-year-old, who lived far away, and therefore it's very clear to me, I wasn't sure it was clear to her, that she was going to be leaving home. This was a big change in her life. I said, are you sure? Do you understand that you will not be able to go home every week, probably only 2 or 3 times a year? Are you ready to leave your family? And she said, well, I've lived with my family all my life. It's time to move on. And so she did. And the other one, and this one really connects what I've been saying about why the camps are so important to me and to the work that we do. The other one said, when we said, why do you want to do this? Why do you want to come to the Oprah Winfrey School? And she said, it's my tomorrow. Now, what I've learned from that child is that, in fact, her education is our tomorrow. In fact, the education of all kids is your tomorrow. It is our responsibility to make sure that children have access to the kind of education which we and the Webbs and John Dewey and all of us know can make a difference. I believe that our democracy will not work unless we figure out how to provide access to good schools for every single child in this country in a public school. And I believe we can do that, but we need to understand how important it is. So education is our tomorrow, and I appreciate very much that I've learned that in part because I had a chance to see what the best education could be, and I saw it in Vermont. So thank you all for joining me in celebrating this wonderful thing.
Thank you, Peter. So, Joan Countryman. What can I say? It was an honor. Thank you so much. I'd also like to thank Peter for everything that you did. The wonderful celebration. Thank you so much. And Mickey, you did a great and brief, might I add, job as well. Your talk. Jack, Ruth, and Polly, welcome to the circle. And I want to thank everybody for coming. Thank you very much.